What does it look like when America reminds China who controls the oceans? November 14th to 15, 2025. The USS Nimitz, 100,000 tons of nuclear-powered dominance, led 9 vessels through waters China claims as its own near Scarborough Shoal. 3 American destroyers, 2 Japanese warships, 4 Philippine vessels. Not quietly, not apologetically. China's response: deploy bombers and issue angry statements while a carrier strike group that could obliterate their entire surface fleet operates 50 miles from their claimed territory. This wasn't a freedom of navigation transit. This was a 9-ship demonstration. Build your artificial islands. Draw your 9-dash line. The U.S. Navy operates where international law permits, and you can't stop us. The Nimitz, when 100,000 tons of diplomacy shows up. The USS Nimitz isn't just a ship. It's a mobile, sovereign piece of American territory that happens to be powered by nuclear reactors and capable of projecting more air power than most nations possess. Commissioned in 1975, CVN-68 is the lead ship of the Nimitz class, the backbone of American naval power for half a century, and the reason the United States can credibly threaten military intervention anywhere on Earth within days. Let's talk about what the Nimitz actually represents: 100,000 tons of displacement. That's roughly the weight of 50,000 cars or 500 fully loaded commercial aircraft. The ship is 1,092 feet long, longer than the Empire State Building is tall. It carries a crew of approximately 5,000 sailors and aviators. It's essentially a floating city with more firepower than most nations can deploy. 60 to 90 aircraft embarked. FA-18 Super Hornets for air superiority and strike missions. EA-18 Growlers for electronic warfare and jamming enemy radars. E-2 Hawkeyes providing airborne early warning. Helicopters for anti-submarine warfare and search and rescue. This isn't just a ship, it's an entire air force that moves. Nuclear propulsion means unlimited range and 20-plus years between refuelings. The Nimitz doesn't need to stop for gas. It can operate indefinitely at sea, limited only by crew endurance and food supplies. That strategic mobility allows the U.S. to maintain presence anywhere, anytime, without depending on overseas bases or fuel shipments. November 14th to 15, the Nimitz led a 9-ship flotilla through waters China has been trying to claim as territorial seas, despite having 0 legitimate legal claim under international maritime law. The optics alone send a message. America operates carrier strike groups in your backyard, and you can't stop us. The fleet: 3 nations, 9 warships, 1 message. The beauty of this operation wasn't just American power, it was the coalition that demonstrated China's regional isolation among its neighbors. American assets: USS Nimitz, CVN-68, carrier strike group flagship, 100,000-ton symbol of American naval dominance. USS Wayne Meyer, DDG-108. Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer, Aegis Air Defense, Tomahawk cruise missiles, USS Gridley, DDG-101. Another Arleigh Burke destroyer, anti-air warfare specialist, USS Lena Sutcliffe Higbee, DDG-123. Newest Flight 2A destroyer, commissioned 2024 state-of-the-art systems. 3 American destroyers alone represent more firepower than entire navies of most nations. Each carries 90-plus vertical launch cells loaded with SM-2, SM-6 air defense missiles. Tomahawk cruise missiles capable of striking targets 1,000-plus miles away, and anti-submarine rockets. The Aegis combat system on these ships can track and engage hundreds of targets simultaneously. Missiles, aircraft, surface vessels, coordinating defensive and offensive fires across the entire strike group. Japanese assets: JS Akabono, DD-108. Murasame-class destroyer, modern Japanese maritime self-defense force combatant, SH-60K Seahawk helicopter. Anti-submarine warfare, surface search, maritime interdiction. Japan's participation is particularly significant. The Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force is one of the most capable navies in Asia, and they're operating alongside American forces in waters China claims, sending the message that Tokyo stands with Washington against Chinese territorial expansion. Philippine assets, BRP Jose Rizal, FF-150. Modern frigate commissioned 2020 represents Philippine naval modernization. BRP Antonio Luna, FF-151. Sister ship to Jose Rizal, newest vessels in Philippine fleet, BRP Melchora Aquino. Coast Guard cutter, Maritime Law Enforcement BRP Cape San Agustin, Coast Guard cutter, patrol and interdiction. The Philippines operates in their own claimed waters, the West Philippine Sea, as Manila calls it, alongside American and Japanese forces. This isn't foreign navies operating in someone else's territory. This is the Philippines defending their legitimate maritime claims with support from allies who recognize international law over Chinese revisionist maps. 9 ships, 3 nations, operating in waters that international law recognizes as international or Philippine, not Chinese, despite Beijing's insistence otherwise. Scarborough Shoal, the flashpoint that defines the dispute. Why Scarborough Shoal? Why does this particular pile of rocks and reefs matter enough to deploy carrier strike groups? Because Scarborough represents everything wrong with China's South China Sea strategy and everything right about international resistance to it. Scarborough Shoal sits approximately 120 nautical miles from the Philippines' main island of Luzon. Under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, this places it well within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone, the 200 nautical mile zone where nations have sovereign rights over natural resources. By any reasonable interpretation of international maritime law, Scarborough falls under Philippine jurisdiction. China claims it anyway, not through legal argument, but through the same "we've claimed it historically" logic that justifies essentially the entire South China Sea within China's absurd 9-dash line, a border that literally extends to within miles of other nations' coasts and has been rejected by international tribunals as having no basis in law. In 2012, China seized effective control of Scarborough Shoal from the Philippines through a standoff where Chinese Coast Guard vessels simply refused to leave. Since then, China has maintained presence around the shoal, harassing Philippine fishing vessels and preventing Filipino fishermen from accessing traditional fishing grounds. In 2016, an international tribunal ruled in the Philippines' favor, declaring China's 9-dash line claim has no legal basis and that Scarborough Shoal falls within Philippine maritime zones. China's response: ignore the ruling completely and continue occupying the area. So when the Nimitz strike group conducts joint patrols near Scarborough, it's not just a military exercise. It's a demonstration that the United States and its allies recognize international law over Chinese territorial revisionism. Every passage reinforces that China doesn't control these waters just because they drew lines on a map and built artificial islands. The 13th MMCA, routine operations that drive Beijing crazy. The multilateral maritime cooperative activity isn't a one-off provocation. It's the 13th iteration of regular joint operations that the US, Japan, and Philippines conduct to maintain freedom of navigation and uphold international maritime law. The routine nature is part of the message. This isn't special. This is what normal operations look like in international waters. The exercises accomplish several objectives. Interoperability training. American, Japanese, and Philippine forces practice coordinating operations, sharing information, and operating as a unified fleet. This matters because if conflict erupts with China, these forces need to work together seamlessly. Presence operations. Simply being there sends the message that these waters aren't exclusively Chinese, despite Beijing's claims. Regular patrols normalize Allied presence and prevent China from establishing facts on the water through constant occupation. China's impotent response: bombers and bluster. China's reaction to the Nimitz strike group operation was entirely predictable. Deploy bomber formations and issue angry statements claiming the exercises undermine regional peace and stability. Senior Colonel Tian Junli of the PLA's Southern Theater Command warned that the exercises were provocative and demanded the U.S. stop creating trouble. Let's be brutally honest about what this response reveals. China can't actually do anything meaningful to stop these operations. They can scramble bombers and fly them around, creating propaganda footage for domestic consumption showing the PLA responding strongly to foreign provocation. They can issue statements and warnings that get reported in Chinese state media as evidence of Beijing's firm stance. But they can't force the Nimitz to leave. They can't intimidate 3 Arleigh Burke destroyers into abandoning the operation. They certainly can't threaten Japanese or Philippine vessels operating in waters with American carrier support. Why? Because any actual military action against American naval forces would be an act of war against the world's most powerful military, and China knows it would lose that war catastrophically. The PLA Navy has grown significantly over the past decades, but it still can't match the U.S. Navy's global reach, combat experience, or technological superiority. And it definitely can't match a carrier strike group in its own backyard when that carrier is supported by the entire American military infrastructure. The verdict: when carriers speak, dictatorships listen. 9 ships, 3 nations, 1 carrier strike group, operating in international and Philippine waters that China claims but doesn't control. The 13th Multilateral Maritime Cooperative Activity wasn't dramatic or violent. It was routine operations that drive Beijing absolutely crazy, precisely because they're routine. The fundamental reality remains unchanged. America dominates the world's oceans, operates wherever international law permits, and China can't do anything about it except complain. 100,000 tons of American carrier. That's what maritime dominance looks like. And no amount of Chinese island building or bomber deployments changes the fact that when the U.S. Navy shows up, if this breakdown of American naval dominance in the South China Sea opened your eyes to the real power dynamics in the region, smash that like button and subscribe for more analysis of the operations shaping global security. Drop a comment. Can China actually challenge U.S. naval supremacy, or is it all just bluster? Let's discuss!